Hello, welcome back to the Pioneers segment of Reston's African American Legacy Series. I'm David Jackson, along with Colonel Wade Gadlin.
Good morning. Tepper, it's good to have you here as a guest. Dr. Tepper Gill is a joint professor of electrical engineering and computer engineering and mathematics at Howard University and a longtime Reston resident. Tepper, it crosses my mind that a number of young people view mathematics and physics as extremely complex and difficult subjects and therefore beyond their reach. What is it about those subjects that caught your attention as a young student, and what moved you to pursue those areas as a career?
Well, that's three questions.
Yes, it is.
Let me start with the first one. Of course, I'm going to answer the first one from this perspective and not from the perspective of a student when I was a student.
Sure.
Over the years, I have noticed something that, well, I started out learning basketball, how to sing, how to dance, how to play football. And one thing they all have in common is there's a certain set of fundamentals, and if you learn them well, they always stay with you, and you can improve yourself by simply keeping your fundamentals in place. Well, the same thing's true in mathematics, actually. And mathematics, of course, is the place where everybody gets knocked away from all the other opportunities that open up in science and engineering. In mathematics, it's actually quite simple. Algebra is arithmetic with symbols. Calculus is algebra with one new idea. The problem is that the young people never get taught the fundamentals because everyone has been intellectually intimidated, everyone, to think that mathematics is something different from dance or singing or football or basketball. It's the same thing. You find the fundamentals and you practice again and again and again. Now, over the years, I have been very successful, and a number of other of my colleagues have been successful in training young people. And I use the word training explicitly. Mathematics is not about ability, it's about training, just as music. Of course, people have talent, and I don't want to give the impression that they don't. But the talent doesn't even kick in until after you've been trained. And so most of our young people have never been trained. Most of us weren't actually trained. We ended up training ourselves and learning on the side and growing from there. Now, I had the advantage of not learning any mathematics until after I was 19 years old. I graduated from high school, and I had this strange epiphany. I saw myself, I was working on the racetrack in Florida, taking care of horses. I was feeding them, I was cleaning them in all kinds of funny places. And I realized that I was taking care of the horses better than I was taking care of myself. And for some reason, that just didn't seem right. And I realized that the only out for me was to get an education. Of course, at that time, education was always important among our people in the community. So I made up my mind and I started reading books. I started, one young man had a telescope, so we would, in the evenings, we would actually study the stars. And so I got interested, but not seriously. I really saw myself as a musician. So when I got back home, my brother had already enrolled in night school, so I had to go back to night school and take high school algebra 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and geometry 1 and 2 like everyone else, because in those days they wouldn't even let you come to college if you hadn't had the college preparatory background. As a consequence, I was conscious of what I had to do to be successful. And since I was raised in a family where work was the only thing we thought we had going for us, I saw it as work. So as opposed to doing every odd problem, which was the assignment, I did the odd and even problems. And I did them over after I did them once to make sure that I could do it as fast as I could. I thought that you had to be able to do it fast. It turned out to be a godsend. Just that I had been taught to work hard and to work at doing it over and over again. Just as we do in football, we practice our push-ups, we practice our running, we practice our jumping. It was the same thing to me. It turned out to be the right thing. And before I knew it, people were telling me that I was smart and all this stuff, and that scared me, of course, because I knew I wasn't. I had to work so hard to actually accomplish anything until it didn't occur to me that was really the truth. Then I had the blessing that the piano I was trying to learn music on could not be tuned. So as a consequence, I had to give up my music career. And here I am.
Well, Tepper, in addition to your taking care of horses down in Florida, you've accumulated a very impressive list of accomplishments. PhD, college professor, author, international lecturer, research. What are you most proud of?
Well, well, that's kind of different. Normally, I don't say anything to anybody about it because it sounds so crazy. When I was taking physics, of course, the mathematics part was easy because I understood the mathematics, but I always saw physics as something that you could understand. And the first time I couldn't understand, I could understand it mathematically, but I didn't understand it as a physical idea. And that's when they said that space and time are the same. Now, it may not sound like it matters, but the conceptual framework for which we try to frame our view of physical reality determines how we attack the problems that we come up with. As a consequence, a young physicist by the name of Richard Feynman in the 50s, he suggested that we give time the natural role that it has in the direction of physical reality. I always saw myself as living in a giant three-dimensional motion picture, and the idea that time was like space just didn't make sense to me. So Feynman not only showed that when you allow time to have its right role in the framework of defining what physical reality looks like, it makes things much, much easier. The computations become easier. It's easier to understand what the physical processes are doing. An open problem, mathematically and physically, was there's no mathematical foundations for a giant three-dimensional motion picture in which time takes on the role of the director. So over the last 20 years, myself, along with some co-workers, we developed the mathematical foundations for that, and I consider that a major accomplishment. And it's a part of a book that's coming out later on next year.
Well, you also had something to do with the installation of the very first supercomputer at an HBCU, didn't you?
Yeah, that was a part of a separate problem.
On a practical kind of.
Yeah, on a practical level. Yeah, that's the engineering side. You know, when I first came to Howard, one of the problems was that young people were complaining about the fact that we didn't have the same resources that people had at major universities, yet we both wanted to and was expected to do some competitive research in all areas. Well, at that time, it was a very interesting time. The computer revolution was just coming about, and we had some very talented students in the electrical engineering department. In fact, we built the first network for Howard University. Internet at Howard, all electrical engineering students. We didn't have a computer engineering program at the time. But I had been working with, doing some research associated with some guys at Minnesota, some other mathematicians in Minnesota for a long time. And the Army sent out an RFP to build a high-performance computing research center and locate it at a number of universities. Well, Howard University, myself are the lead at Howard, and friends are the lead at University of Minnesota. We bid on it, and we were successful in acquiring the contract. That was $1 million a year for Howard over a 10-year period. It turned out to be a 10-year period. And of course, we had our own supercomputer. We ended up building a very, very sophisticated network from the research center to the hospital, where we did the first medical imaging research actually in the country at Howard University Hospital, co-located with the research center we were supported with. So it was, and also we almost, politics and finances prevented us, we almost became successful in building a network of computers at all at least the top 10 HBCUs. But that didn't quite work because of funding issues.
Sure.
One of the things I think recent studies have shown, and old studies have shown, is that the representation of African Americans in the sciences is considerably disproportionate, if you will, to whites and others. What is the cause for that, and what can be done to improve our representation in those
Well,
fields?
I sort of hinted at it earlier, and it's just training. You know, if you wanted to be a basketball player, we had plenty of coaches. Almost everybody knows the fundamentals of basketball. If you want to be a musician in our community, we have many, many very talented musicians, and everybody knows the fundamentals. We don't know the fundamentals for training people in mathematics. And I use the word training again and again and again, because we should have as many mathematicians as we have musicians. We should have as many physicists as we have artists. We should have as many engineers as we have. Almost engineers should be normal in our community. But quite the opposite. We're underrepresented in all these areas, and it's because the basic training in mathematics prevents them from showing up. And I use the word training because we think that it's something about skills. Skills, you don't become skilled in basketball until after you learn to dribble, you learn how to do all these things, and you have to learn them, you train at it. And with practice and effort and desire, you become good at it. And then all of a sudden you're a basketball player. The difference is that same effort for 90% of the kids who never make the pros would make them all top-notch engineers.
Well, Tepper, in the next couple of minutes, tell us a bit about your new book.
Oh, come on. Well, the book is mathematics, okay? It's for people at least the third year of graduate school or above. So that means they've already started or planning to write their dissertation. And it's related to the mathematical foundations for what I mentioned before. That's the mathematical side, but that's related to the other problem that I haven't talked about. I also work in physics, and that the physical problem is to actually rewrite most of the fundamentals in physics in such a way that it does not require us to treat time as a fourth dimension like space, but to treat it as a director of physical processes, as Feynman suggested. And of course, I believe that's the way the world looks.
Okay.
But the book is primarily mathematical, but with physical intonations.
Well, congratulations on the book,
Thank you very much.
and thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
We have a small gift for you, courtesy of the producer of our program.
The producer.
And
It pays to know people.
when you next see her, you might thank her for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming
It's
on.
been nice. Thank you.
Well, I'm Wade Gatling with David Jackson. We'd like to thank you for joining us on this segment of Reston's African American Legacy Series. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
Hello and welcome to the Reston's African American Legacy Series. We're very happy to have you with us today, and my co-host today is Yulene Bevins.
Thank you for having me. Sandra, how did you get to Reston? I know that you were here for a long time. Well, it's interesting because you have to kind of go back a little bit to come forward. My husband, Carl English, late Carl English, was born in Lynchburg, Virginia. So he kind of went through the 1940s of Virginia life and segregation, et cetera, et cetera. And I was born in New York City. And I went to Howard University, and I was a part of the civil rights movement there with Stokely Carmichael, and I even have a picture of me at the White House. But I go back because raising our children, we had two sons, Carlton and Eric. We wanted to raise them in a community that was diverse, sort of similar to New York, but where they felt safe and comfortable. Carl was in the computer field. He became president of Atlantis Data Communications and CEO. And so I found out I was pregnant living in Maryland, and so we said, well, we've got to find some place to live. So there was a Ebony magazine that we found that had a description of Reston, and some of the people in the magazine I recognized from Howard. And so I said, well, you know, maybe we should give this a try. And he said, I'm not interested in going to Virginia. But anyway, another, I think, milestone was another magazine that said Better Homes and Gardens. And it happened to have a house in it that was in Reston. And I said, well, maybe this is another omen. One can never tell. So Carl decided that he would come and venture to Reston on his own one weekend, and he was with a realtor by the name of Thelma Fleming. That afternoon, about 4 o'clock, I get a phone call, and the lady says, "Oh, congratulations!" And I said, "For what?" And she said, "Oh, they accepted your offer." I said, "What offer?" And to make it short, Carl had gone to Reston and had purchased a house without me. Now, in the meanwhile, I am an interior designer. I had to do something while he was being executive, and I was flabbergasted. So it turns out that we moved to Reston. Now, the other interesting part about this is that Better Homes and Gardens magazine that I looked at had a beautiful white stucco house built by Bonner and an architect, who was an architect. It turns out that we moved right next door to him. Now, this was my favorite house of all time, sir. And since he was building houses, he asked me to be the designer for his model homes. And he had 3 other designers that he asked, but he chose me. I guess he could keep an eye on me because I was next door. But so in essence, that is how the family, Carlton, Eric, and myself, came to Reston. And at that time, I was pregnant with the daughter Tiffany. So that was a part of it. I think the other part being that I mentioned somewhat about discrimination, etc. Of course, we thought Reston was a utopia of some sorts. But lo and behold, Carl had to sue Southland Corporation before discrimination. And we had an incident with 2 other families, the Sharps and the Heads, where we had to sue them. Okay. And I really would like to have my son come on another segment and talk about that because he was really involved. Was this Mona Head involved in that?
Mona's son was involved in it, but only 2 families sued Southland, and that was the Sharps and the Englishes. And so I think he could probably talk about that.
Well, why were they suing them?
Well, they were suing them because they had discriminated against Carl. Carl is very quick on his feet, and so he asked the woman to sell him some cigarettes, and she said no because she did not want to give back. It's involved, all right. It involved mainly our children who went over to the 7-Eleven and couldn't get their money back, and so from something that they were playing with, and they came over and got us, and I couldn't go because I was having this picnic, etc. And so Carl and Beverly Sharp went over, and as a consequence to that, she refused to sell Carl cigarettes, and so therefore we had a case against them. And so the whole idea was that they retrained their people to make certain that they were diversified in how to treat people. But that was just another aspect of Reston. It's still positive. It's all positive, but it's just a balance of scales here.
So it just tells you that issues take place, and then you have to come to solutions to correct them, and you were able to move in that direction to make it a positive situation.
True.
So that
true.
That was
true.
Great.
Absolutely. And I had mentioned that Carl was an engineer who was in the computer field and the satellite communications field. So besides being an interior designer, I had my exposure. I worked with him and for him at a time. And after his death, I sort of took his visions and went to Africa and participated in the African Round Table and went after licenses for satellite communications and wireless, etc. So I was trying not to be just another pretty face. I was trying to, carry out some of his dreams and philosophies. I didn't always succeed, but I think I would have been dismayed if I had not tried, etc.
Tell us about some of the other boards that you were on and other activities that you were involved with.
Well, at the present time, I'm on the board of Capital Tech University. I've been a trustee there for the last probably 20 years. I took Carl's place. He was vice chairman, and so I've been working with them now, and we gave a scholarship 25 years ago, an endowment for a African-American students, and also been on the Phelps Stokes Fund board, and Martin Luther King Jr. Foundation.
You were one of the
in Weston.
founders too,
Yes.
aren't you?
Yes, yeah. So I try to stay active and involved, always with young people in mind to encourage, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
What other activities are you involved in now that,
Well,
I know you're very
I've
busy.
I've relinquished my African ventures, although it was fascinating. To be one example, I had joined a corporation that was also an agribusiness up until about 4 years ago. And I found myself in the back roads of Ghana with no passport going into Cote d'Ivoire and discussing the price of cashew nuts with farmers, et cetera, and not knowing where I was going to stay. It was an interesting dynamics, and the gentleman with me, I said to him, if we have to leave, do you remember that left turn we made back here?
Were you driving?
No, I said, would you know how to get back? He said, no, we're here for the weekend, nothing else we can do. So I've sort of tried to keep my hand in business, but at the moment I am taking care of my mother, who is 96. So, you know, the dynamics of your life change. You know, you have transitions. And so I'm transitioning from one place to where God is going to send me next.
You don't live in Reston now. Where do you live?
No, I live out in Leesburg. I have I call it a farm. It's about 37 acres. And it's far more than I could imagine ever, being from New York. And so I learned how to deal with a bush hog and raccoons and whatever else runs around. And I love venison, so I let my neighbor hunt periodically so we can do that. But I'm ready to come back to civilization, yeah.
Back to Reston?
Could be.
well, we want to thank you for participating, and your story is very interesting, and we would like to welcome you back, if possible, again with your, maybe your son will be able to participate. And thank you very much, and we have a little gift for you.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope I haven't been too loquacious. Oh, my. Oh, why, thank you. Oh, surprise, surprise. Okay, thanks.
Until we meet again, thank you very much, Eugene Bevins and Gloria Durham. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you both. Enjoyed it very much.